So if we are ready to start the panel, the panel will be chaired by me and Christian. I would like to ask the first question. And should I put the question on the presentation or just read it?
I think it's useful if you share your screen.
So let me share the screen. So here, so we'll see the question, and other attendees also will hear. Here is the first question. So how do you see the role of emotion in changing attitudes towards attitudes about climate change? How can communication strategies shape emotion and motivate pro-environmental behavior? This is the first question.
And whom should speak first, Artur?
I think that it will be great to firstly to listen to Magda, who is experienced. So Magda, could you please the panel and tries to answer briefly the question?
Okay. At first, there is a story, like most of people who really engage in climate change, like not engage on the level, I don't eat meat and bike to work, but engage on the level, they try to influence public life and make really big changes. They actually also experience quite strong emotions about this. So that's not a scientific evidence, but I think for the highly motivated group, they also very often confess experiencing some of the anxiety or depression, and very often also anger. So strong emotions are important also in motivating political actions. But that might be not true for so everybody's citizens or customers, because those guys, they actually experiencing negative emotions like anxiety and worry. That doesn't really translate to behaviors like this consumer behaviors. It also often more demotivates people than motivates them. So for everybody, like for people on the street, emotions are not enough to actually engage. And things that would help there would be probably, as I said, knowledge, but also as psychological research, so some form of agency, personal agency, but also collective agency, which is important. So it's not easy with emotions, but also I think that's my last idea, that our communications are not everything that influences emotions. That, for example, with climate change, we got reality. And I believe as things will get worse, and they will, we will actually have a lot of negative emotions and probably independently of what we try to communicate. So it's not all marketing, but reality.
Okay, thank you, Magda. Agnieszka, could you say something about especially the aspect of communication, since you are in the Extinction Rebellion, and we know that Extinction Rebellion got particular way of giving communicates, especially for the young people.
Yes, first of all, I apologize, I will read, okay, because I want to be precise and I want to fit in time. So I already wrote my answer. But before answering the question, I would like to challenge the phrase climate change, so frequently used here, and point out that this phrase had been withdrawn from the language of many commentators as confusing, among others by the British newspaper The Guardian. In their opinion, change describes the climate crisis too softly. Also, it introduces an element of passivity and causes unintentional relief by releasing those who hear or use it from responsibility. It is because changes in nature are instinctively perceived as something normal, independent of man. Even in this example, we can see how huge is a role that language plays in shaping emotions. As you said, I represent the Extinction Rebellion movement, which in its strategy focused on reshaping attitudes towards climate issues by modifying the language into radical one. Instead of talking about climate change, XR activists talk not even about crisis, but directly about the climate catastrophe and extinction of species, including mankind. This is a deliberate communication strategy designed to shake up a sleeping society and gain emotional responses. The calculation of XR activists assumes that this tactic may affect various groups: denialists, those who ignore scientific data, those who are indifferent to information about climate threats, and those who feel deep sorrow or even mourning and stay helpless. The idea of the XR movement is at the same time to restore people's hope that there is still something to be done, and that the key to this is mass social mobilization, which, like other historical nonviolent rebellions, will influence decision makers to accelerate actions. So this is my answer. Okay.
Thank you very much. It was excellent answer, and I'm very happy that you're here with us and you can say something about Extinction Rebellion. So please, Magalie, could you comment if you want to?
Yes, absolutely. I think in Norway, people are identifying less with this catastrophe because we're way up north. We're not seeing the effects of climate change so much. It's very easy to disengage. So I think it's very important for our groups here to make sure that we are relevant and that people can identify with what we're talking about. I think in Spire, our communications with young people are an attempt to empower them to take action. So this year is an election year, so we're focusing a lot on trying to get green parties into the government and trying to lower the threshold generally for an active participation in the democracy and give people a sense of agency, that they have power, which they really do.
Okay, thank you, Magalie. Kacper, would you like to comment also?
What is there more to say after those three fantastic comments? I want to emphasize one thing though, the thing that Magdalena said at the very beginning, which is the anger and how great potential it has. And I particularly love how Greta at the very beginning of Fridays for Future movement gave this very famous TED talk when she said that I want you to panic, I want you to be angry, I want you to have all of these emotions. I don't want you to be calm or, hopeful, because there may be no hope at all. We just, we deserve to try, and we must try to stop the climate catastrophe. So that's one thing, the anger, which is such a strong emotion that all people can relate to, because we all at some point in our lives, very often we feel the emotions of anger, and that's why I believe it can be such a strong mobilization tool to actually bring millions of people into the streets and to tell them that there may be no future, there may be no safety, no health for them and the next generations if they won't act now.
Yes, thank you. I think at this point it's my turn to take over moderation of this panel. So I would like to ask you the second question that we prepared for you, and that is now more turning it to our research project, because we are still at the beginning of what we want to do. And what we would like to know from you is what kind of knowledge about emotions in climate change communication would actually be beneficial for you? What are you wondering about? What could you use as input? And what kind of research on climate emotions would support the activities of NGOs and grassroots movements? Let's start with Magalie this time.
Yes, I actually found your talk quite enlightening on that topic. I thought it was really useful to hear about how we can redirect apathy by making things more relevant for people. Yeah, we want to inspire optimism over despair in a way. If people are being told that the world is going to end, then that's the last thing they hear from us. Then they are not going to do anything. We need to give them something concrete. But I think it's really important for us to find that balance between acknowledging the problem and the severity of this catastrophe and presenting practical solutions or giving people a channel through which to act. Yeah, so I think what you said in your talk was actually very important for our group, at least.
Yes, thank you. Agnieszka, what is your take on this?
Yeah, what seems to be the most important in the study of climate emotions is the verification of assumptions made by activists. In the case of the Extinction Rebellion movement, it would be important to examine how effectively experiencing a shock as a result of acquiring a radical knowledge about the proximity of the climate disaster can help in taking actions aimed at reducing it, and to what extent such a radical knowledge poses a risk of falling into sadness and inertia. It would also be very valuable to check whether the catastrophic message, balanced by the message about the chance to counterattack the disaster, would be enough to save people from a feeling of hopelessness and apathy. The problem can be also reversed, and the research question can be asked in a different way. To what extent can the appeals for a pro-environmental attitude and acting be effectively strengthened by introducing elements indicating a catastrophe? Separately, it would be good to determine which emotions trigger a change in attitudes and behavior only, and which influence the decision to become a climate activist. Are they different emotions or are they the same? And such a decision is determined by other factors than emotions. Yet another problem is examining what emotions accompany the social perception of the activities of pro-climate movements. It would be especially interesting to find out whether the use of civil disobedience methods by XR movement, making life difficult for ordinary people, for example, by blocking traffic, evokes only negative emotions. Also, do these emotions change when the reason for this action becomes clear? That's it.
Yes, thank you. Just a short comment on this one. In my group, we are at the moment writing a book on disruptive communication, where the strategy of Extinction Rebellion will be part of the analysis that we do. And we look at if we probably need this disruption of everyday life, and to which degree and where and what. But that's probably going beyond this discussion that we have here at the moment. So Kasper, what is your position on the question that we discuss here?
I think what I would need personally, and the climate movement as a whole, would be very concrete, very direct answers to actually the question posed. So what emotions should we appeal to? What are the most successful ones? And I know it's always very hard in science to say for sure, and obviously to give those very direct answers. And I suppose it would take years of data and like meta-analysis and so on, but that's my dream, something that I would like to hear. Those very concrete, what works best, what's most successful for social movements? Is it fear, is it anger, is it joy, or is it hope? What we must use to be the most successful we can be.
Thank you. Magda, what do you think?
There's one controversy which is important, and that's the one about positive and negative communication. It's really complex, but I would like strengthen Veronika Kaubak's comments in the chat that there is actually a thing called false hope. Like Maria Ojala, she's a Swedish researcher, distinguished between constructive hope and false hope. And there is a lot of study showing that those who are most hopeful, they disengage from action. So it's the jakoś to będzie in Polish hope, like a hope who enables not acting. So Extinction Rebellion has a point in communicating, and Greta Thunberg might be a point that all these hope messages directed at young and everybody, they actually don't convince people because they might think, okay, but they are false. Like politicians are saying to us to stay hopeful and engage, but they don't doing the right thing. So hope is a complex issue. And as developmental psychologist, I would be interested in the question, what works long term? Because in studies, in experiment, in questionnaires, we have, like in studies like bodily reaction, we have this in the moment. But the real question is what motivates people for years to stay engaged with the issue. Because very often those who are angry or scared or don't take the message in the first point, they become later very engaged as they process it, because I believe this information needs quite a lot of processing. So this developmental perspective would be interesting in itself.
That's indeed also a very, very relevant point, that we often focus on short-term effects of our interventions and studies, and it's much more difficult to see this complex long-term effects that things have. For the last round of questions, I would like to now shift the view to the activists themselves. So what, in your view, are the emotions of the activists and the people involved in climate action, and how can we support them to prevent to burn out? Because if you worry a long time, if you really act a lot and then feel that nothing happens, there is a certain danger that you personally suffer from that. So Kasper, what would be your take on this one?
I believe there are very different emotions. Obviously, it's very personal how, like, what motivates one person may not be motivational at all for another person. In my experience, for what I've seen, other people, other activists, it's always a mix between anger and motivation itself. But I also believe that you cannot really be an activist and have no hope at all. I mean, there needs to be some silver lining. You need to have at least some sort of hope that it's gonna get better, that you're not doing it just for the sake of being an activist, but rather you're part of some bigger change. So I believe, so first of all, the anger, to be very direct, the anger which motivates you to go on the street when you see that politicians are not doing anything, the anger is very natural to you because it's so important to you. And then the hope that actually gives you this very long-term motivation, in a sense, for being and forming social movements. But I also believe, and I really want to emphasize that activism itself can be a great tool to fight with eco-anxiety, with climate depression, with this sort of so-called disorders, or rather anxiety in general, because I believe that activism gives you a very direct tool to do something. Because in a situation when we're talking about a climate catastrophe, when it seems so abstract, so big, definitely bigger than all of us, and then we hear how dangerous it is, and then we see that people in charge, that governments are not willing to do anything to stop it often, especially in Poland, then it's very easy to go into this anxiety. What's going to happen to me, to my children, etc. And then the climate activism comes and says, even though you're just one person, with other people you can form big groups, you can form social movements that for the past thousands of years have been transforming societies, politics, economics, and so on. And it gives you this thing that you can focus on to make sure that you're doing your part in fighting with climate change. That's why I believe that this climate catastrophe, that activism can prevent once more, that activism can prevent us from the burnout, this motivation, this hope, this feeling that you're doing something, even when it seems so big, so abstract, so dangerous, that you're doing your part, and thus you're making the world a better place, you're making it more likely for the movement to succeed and thus stop climate crises.
Thank you for this perspective of that the movement itself can also be like have a healing component for the activists. How is the situation for you in Norway, Magalie?
Yeah, absolutely agree. The sense of community is absolutely essential for just keeping going. We go up and down in waves of engagement and hope, and then into complete apathy, overwhelmed, frustrated. Especially in the last year, really reminded us that climate change is just one issue on our planet. We have so much other stuff going on. And I think for a lot of people, it's very difficult to just invest in one thing or see where it is that they can make change when there's so much sort of war and destruction happening around us. So definitely agree with that sense of community and the hopefulness that you get from actually doing something together and putting together an event or a debate and holding people accountable is essential.
Yes, thank you. Magda, what would you say to this question? Are you an activist yourself? Yes, you are.
I have a problem, so it's complicated with the word. Depends on the definition. As a psychologist, I would say that social support is the crucial level, and also social acknowledgement. So people can go at length if they get lots of social support from their community and sort of acknowledgement of the issue they are working for. So many of us who stay for long in this work, we actually do so because we have good communities and people supporting us. So this is something which is often not seen, but it's crucial to staying in it.
Mm-hmm. Agnieszka, what is your final reflection on this?
Yeah, my final writing. So obviously there are various emotions among activists, but in case of Extinction Rebellion, anger dominates most activists, and we hear it in our ritual love and anger or love and rage greeting. So in the declarative layer, it is difficult to find sadness. The outside is dominated rather by a confrontation attitude. Many activists are sensitive to the manifestation of the hypocrisy of the current system, which is described by them as toxic and equated with capitalism. This militant attitude is often combined with the expression of mockery and irony, for example, towards the more and more common greenwashing practices, but also in the form of mutual scrutiny of their own attitudes as to whether they are radical enough. Well, actually, it led to the kind of crisis within Extinction Rebellion. We are experiencing now such a crisis. What I personally find disturbing is the two mechanical linking of climate issues with ideological issues. The Extinction Rebellion movement in Poland is created mainly by young people with left views. Their radicalism and maximalist approach go far beyond the climate goal. Such a situation is a recipe for failure not only in the activist field, but also in the personal one, and it may result in great disappointment due to the inability to make an immediate total change. We can speculate as to whether such a shift towards degrowth is indeed a condition for survival. It probably is, but in the light of individual activist expectations, it may be accomplished later than his or her burnout. To prevent this, perhaps teaching how to recognize emotions and manage anger would be helpful.
Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are already done with this discussion. We could discuss for a long time, and I think it is really interesting to hear your different perspectives and to see that, especially this community aspect and this feeling of being able to do something is really important, and that also resonates with what we now see in a lot of research coming up, that if we should be able to do something about this, we can only do it together, and we need to put our small contributions into the larger picture. But I leave the last words to Arthur to close this webinar.